Welcome to Tumbleweed Radio. I'm Connor Orr. Today, I'm going to take a bit of a leap away from local matters to discuss an issue that is relevant to all of us, not just people of the Rocky Mountain Southwest, but all of humanity, all across the world. I'm talking about the process of radicalization. No, I'm not talking about the process of becoming more and more into surfing. I'm talking about the process by which an individual or group's set of beliefs become more and more severe through constant reinforcement and escalation of beliefs that are already held. This kind of process is incredibly widespread today, and it is not just affecting the right or the left. We are all being affected by the information bubbles that we live in, and social media has been extremely effective in creating the kinds of spaces wherein radicalization occurs. Now, I want to be upfront with you all. I do have a political agenda here. My primary goal is to create content that helps bridge the gap between left and right wings of American politics. I've worked hard to write out all of this information in a nonpartisan way, but there are certain facts of this conversation that must be accepted up front so as to not create offense later on. For the sake of this conversation, I will strive to identify two forms of radicalization: conservative and liberal. The extreme states of these two political orientations are fascism and communism, respectively. Let me tell you what I'm not going to do here. I'm not going to call or in any way insinuate that all conservative folk are Nazis, and I'm not going to call or insinuate in any way that all liberals are communists. The vast majority of Americans lie somewhere in between these two wildly disparate categories, and there is an endless variety of political and social beliefs that are held in between these two most extreme endpoints. What I will do, however, is identify and condemn those nonpartisan elements on the road to radicalization that are vicious, unscientific, and antisocial. Fascism is deeply connected to racism, and it is wildly important in our global society to condemn racism in the strongest possible terms. The science is there. We know for certain that the genetic differences between groups of people are minuscule compared to the differences between individuals. Cultural differences may be vast, but culture is imparted through experience, not genetics. Ideas like genetic white supremacy are dead in the water when one looks at the data. I have a bit of bias in this discussion. I was born and raised Jewish, and I attended religious school and synagogue for many years. I have personally met and spoken with several survivors of the Holocaust, and I studied German language and culture in university, so I have no doubt in my mind that self-proclaimed Nazis today are deeply sick people with horrible ideas. I don't have the same innate bias towards communism, but I have studied world history enough to know that there are absolutely horrible ideas and practices that can be justified by a left-wing attitude as well. Millions and millions of people died under the instruction of Joseph Stalin by execution, mass murder, famine, and neglect. The ambiguous golden future for which all of the Soviet Union came together to fight never materialized, and instead was used as a justifying end for the extraordinary and cruel means utilized in 20th century communism. I'm also deeply concerned by the state of China today. The Communist Party of China is organizing Chinese society in ways that are deeply antithetical to American values. The level of censorship and devaluing of individual liberties that you can find over there should be concerning to anyone who believes in the powers of free speech and individual action. Plus, it's not a stretch to say that China is actually executing a Holocaust of their own right now. Even despite the massive levels of state censorship, we know that China has detained at least 1 million members of the Uyghur ethnic minority population in internment camps, as well as other members of Muslim minority populations, and there are reports of torture, sexual assault, and even forced sterilization coming out of those camps. So we've got Nazi Germany on one hand as an example of extreme conservatism, and contemporary China as an example of extreme liberalism. It should be really clear to all Americans that neither of these are examples that we want to follow. So what kind of society are we trying to build in America? That's a huge question, and it varies from person to person. But by analyzing some of the most dangerous elements that we already have in our society, we may be able to make more clear distinguishments about what kind of society we don't want to make. But first, in order to understand the radical elements that exist within our society today, we have to go back and look at the roots. Now, any movement, any idea, can likely be traced back hundreds or thousands of years at least. The idea of white supremacy, for instance, is likely as old as racism itself, but there are inflection points in history that make a particular difference in the progression of some ideas. One such inflection point, to start us off, was in 1865 when the Ku Klux Klan was formed. The Ku Klux Klan was formed by ex-Confederate veterans of the American Civil War in Pulaski, Tennessee, as a whites-only social group, and the former Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest was chosen as the Klan's first Grand Wizard. Now today, unless you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, Grand Wizard is a really lame and nerdy thing to call the leader of your organization, but that kind of title was really not that uncommon in those days. The Benevolent and Protective Order of the Elks, or the Elks Club, as it is commonly known, was founded in 1868 as a social club for minstrel performers, and they use to this day terms like exalted ruler and leading knight to describe their leadership. These medieval-sounding designations, especially in the KKK, may serve to enforce the fantasy that members like to live by, that they are knights in shining armor crusading against a great societal threat. An article on the Ku Klux Klan published on History.com outlines the earlier years of the organization as such. From 1867 onward, African American participation in public life in the South became one of the most radical aspects of Reconstruction, as black people won the election to Southern state governments and even to U.S. Congress. For its part, the Ku Klux Klan dedicated itself to an underground campaign of violence against Republican leaders and voters, both black and white, in an effort to reverse the policies of radical Reconstruction and restore white supremacy in the South. They were joined in this struggle by similar organizations such as the Knights of the White Camellia, which was launched in Louisiana in 1867, and the White Brotherhood. At least 10% of the black legislators elected during the 1867 and 1868 constitutional conventions became victims of violence during Reconstruction, including 7 who were killed. White Republicans, who were derided as carpetbaggers and scalawags, and black institutions such as schools and churches, which were symbols of black autonomy, were also targets for Klan attacks. By 1870, the Ku Klux Klan had branches in nearly every southern state. Even at its height, the Klan did not boast a well-organized structure or clear leadership. Local Klan members, often wearing masks and dressed in the organization's signature long white robes and hoods, usually carried out their attacks at night, acting on their own but in support of the common goals of defeating radical Reconstruction and restoring white supremacy in the South. Klan activity flourished particularly in the regions of the South where black people were a minority or a small majority of the population, and was relatively limited in others. Among the most notorious zones of Klan activity was South Carolina, where in January of 1871, 500 masked men attacked the Union County Jail and lynched 8 black prisoners. That year, Congress passed 3 enforcement acts, including the Ku Klux Klan Act, which specifically designated the crimes common to the Klan as felonies. Again from History.com. For the first time, the Ku Klux Klan Act designated certain crimes committed by individuals as federal offenses, including conspiracies to deprive citizens of the right to hold office, serve on juries, and enjoy the equal protection of the law. The act authorized the president to suspend the right of habeas corpus and arrest accused individuals without charge, and to send federal forces to suppress Klan violence. This expansion of federal authority, which Ulysses S. Grant promptly used in 1871 to crush Klan activity in South Carolina and other areas of the South, outraged Democrats and even alarmed many Republicans. From the early 1870s onward, white supremacy gradually reasserted its hold on the South as support for Reconstruction waned. By the end of 1876, the entire South was under Democratic control once again. In 1882, the U.S. Supreme Court declared the Ku Klux Klan Act unconstitutional, but by that time Reconstruction had ended and much of the KKK had faded away. And then it was back. Throughout the 1920s, the United States of America experienced a massive resurgence of membership in the Ku Klux Klan, largely in response to the 1915 release of D.W. Griffith's wildly racist, yet technologically innovative film, The Birth of a Nation. The Birth of a Nation was a fictionalized telling of the Civil War and Reconstruction period that cast members of the Ku Klux Klan in a heroic light, painting them as knights in shining armor who rode in on horseback to the rescue of helpless white maidens threatened by the ultimate scourge, the greatest threat to civilized society, a black man with rights. The film featured men in blackface acting as these rapists, and also was innovative for being one of the very first films to use a ton of extras and actually to kind of visually multiply those extras to give the impression that there were hundreds and hundreds of Ku Klux Klan riders. Even before its release, though, the film was extremely controversial. but it was legitimized by its endorsement from President Wilson, who said that it was like writing history with lightning, and that his only regret was that it was all so terribly true. The Birth of a Nation was actually the first film to be screened in the White House, so, that's a cool thing about this country. Methodist preacher William Joseph Simmons is usually credited with starting the Klan back up on October 16, 1915, when he led 15 men up Stone Mountain in Georgia to burn a cross and announce the revival of the Ku Klux Klan. The 20s version of the Klan masqueraded as a social club and went to great lengths to legitimize itself through charitable donations and publicity stunts. They made, and still make, the case that it is not necessarily racist to work for a state of white supremacy. Rather, it's just a political expression of self-preservation. By de-emphasizing violence and emphasizing their work in communities, the KKK became more palatable for less radical conservatives. And their plan worked extremely well. Throughout the 1920s, the numbers of the Ku Klux Klan soared with over 4 million members at its peak, with a particularly large concentration in Colorado. Right now, there's an initiative in Colorado to change the name of the neighborhood Stapleton, which was named for Denver's former mayor Benjamin Stapleton, friend to and member of the Ku Klux Klan throughout the 1920s. Although the Klan de-emphasized violence in the 1920s, they definitely did not stop. After the First World War, there was simultaneously a massive influx of immigrant workers and a huge surge of nationalism. This led to an incredible amount of resentment towards immigrants and the subsequent coining of the term 100% Americanism. The founder of the Second Klan, William Joseph Simmons, boiled this idea down to a fairly simple set of criteria. To Simmons and the KKK, a real American was white, native-born, and Protestant. Prohibition was going on at the time, with limited success, so the KKK was able to continue carrying out violence under the guise of upholding prohibition. It just so happened that their primary victims were Catholic immigrants. Newspapers from Huerfano County in the 1920s show a fair amount of division over the Klan. There was definitely a presence, with several buildings around Walsenburg being used as meeting sites, and there was even a cross burned on the hill at the south end of town on Christmas Eve of 1923. There's also a fair amount of public resistance to the KKK, though, but not because of their racist attitudes toward people of color. Huerfano County has always been extremely Catholic, and at the time it had a large immigrant population, so a lot of people felt personally targeted by the Klan's rhetoric and actions. This is a quote from the Walsenburg World on May 16th in 1924. The Ku Klux Klan first came into prominence in Walsenburg when there was a parade of the organization following the killing of 2 police officers and the capture of the slayer. Ostensibly, the parade was to emphasize the desire of the Klan to enforce the law, but unfortunately, religious intolerance has been introduced into the Klan literature, and the parade offended a huge number of citizens. Burning of the cross on other occasions widened the split that came between the people of the community. The mistake of the Klan, then, was in the introduction of religious differences, if it is organized for law enforcement. Religious differences have ever been the most bitter of all controversies, and from the fruit of experience along this line, the founders of our government guaranteed religious liberty to every resident of this country. When the Klan introduced the matter of religion, it is therefore un-American, and Americanism is one of the things on which it puts stress. The Constitution also guarantees to every man due process of law, and the Klan is therefore un-American when, by secrecy and intimidation, it seeks to enforce punishment outside of the law. We really believe that the majority of those that joined did so not knowing these things about the Klan, and if they really wish to be good American citizens, they will sever their connection with an organization which is really un-American. People in Huerfano County were really disturbed by the anonymity of the Klan. The idea that those fellows running around in hoods and robes could be anybody, that one's own neighbor or doctor might be part of such an organization, was disturbing. Plus, the anonymity and notoriety of the Klan enabled non-members to co-opt the Klan name for their own nefarious means. In the same edition of the Walsenburg World, there's an article about bootleggers sending threatening letters to rival bootleggers signed with the initials KKK. Today, there are relatively few active, loud, and proud members of the Ku Klux Klan in Colorado. That is to say, very few people run around wearing the hood and robes. Nonetheless, Over the last few years, there has been a significant rise in right-wing nationalism and white supremacist organizations, with many new groups rising up that have more than a little bit in common with their intellectual forebears. On October 27, 2018, 46-year-old Robert Bowers entered the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He brought with him an AR-15 and three .357 Glock semi-automatic pistols and used all 4 firearms to commit a mass murder, working his way through the synagogue and killing 11 people, wounding 6 others. Bowers had posted statements that hinted at his intentions on the alternative social media platform Gab, which is popular among alt-right and white supremacist users, saying, "The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society likes to bring invaders in that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics. I'm going in." The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society is a Jewish-American non-profit organization that was formed in 1881 in order to provide humanitarian aid to Jewish refugees. They helped refugees from World War I, obviously World War II, Vietnam, and other wars, and have since helped people from all over the world, regardless of religion or ethnicity. So yeah, they're kind of the perfect target for white supremacists. Not only are they a Jewish organization, but they're also helping desperate people immigrate to America, where apparently they go around slaughtering white people. Strange that I haven't seen that in the news. On November 1st, in 2019, a 28-year-old Colorado neo-Nazi named Richard Holzer was arrested by the FBI in Pueblo, Colorado, as part of a year-long sting operation. On November 1st, in 2019, a 28-year-old Colorado neo-Nazi named Richard Holzer was arrested by the FBI in Pueblo, Colorado, as part of a year-long sting operation aimed at thwarting neo-Nazi terrorism. An undercover FBI agent contacted Holzer on Facebook after noticing the man's racist, anti-Semitic, and threatening posts on Facebook. The agent established a relationship with Holzer and was eventually able to verify his intent to blow up the synagogue Temple Emmanuel, the second oldest synagogue in Colorado, and the synagogue that I attended while growing up. The FBI agent gave Holzer fake explosives in order to prove his intent, and then he was summarily apprehended and taken into custody. From the Washington Post. "I wish the Holocaust really did happen," he allegedly said in one message. "They need to die." He also allegedly sent pictures of himself posing with handguns and semi-automatic rifles while dressed in clothing featuring what FBI agents described as white supremacy symbols. In other messages, he said that he hated Jews with a passion and spoke about how he wanted to, quote-unquote, die in a cop shootout, according to the FBI. He allegedly told the undercover agent that he was a former member of the Ku Klux Klan and a skinhead. In mid-October, investigators said, Holzer and a friend met with multiple undercover agents at a restaurant in Colorado Springs, where Holzer talked about how he wanted to destroy the synagogue. One undercover agent asked how he would do it, and Holzer allegedly said that he was considering Molotov cocktails. The group then drove to the synagogue and discussed the possibility of using pipe bombs to inflict more damage, according to the affidavit. The undercover agents offered to supply the bombs, and over the following days they exchanged messages about how to go about the attack, investigators said. During that time, Holzer allegedly passed along videos of himself inspecting the building. On Friday, Holzer rode with an undercover agent to a motel to meet 2 other agents, who presented him with 2 pipe bombs and 14 sticks of dynamite, all of which were inert, according to the affidavit. "This is absolutely gorgeous," Holzer allegedly said. He told the agents that he wanted to detonate the explosives later that night. He was immediately arrested and later pled guilty to these crimes, hoping to only get 20 years instead of 50. There are sadly so many other examples of white supremacist terrorism in America to choose from, we can't possibly hope to cover them all. I want to pivot, though, and talk about some of the features that many of them have in common. Like the KKK, modern white supremacists are empowered by anonymity. You don't have to wear robes and hoods in order to organize clandestine societies anymore, though. Social media has created loads of platforms for people to interact and organize on anonymously. Some of these platforms, like the website 4chan, are specifically designed for anonymity and censorship-free communication. Groups like the KKK and neo-Nazis were really quick to pick up on the power of digital mass communication and have been steadily disseminating memes and ideological clues on sites like this pretty much since the internet's onset. 4chan has been the host of many extremists over the years and is the gateway through which many people have found their way to other, more targeted platforms. In 2014, a female game designer named Zoe Quinn released her game Depression Quest. This was more of an interactive art piece than a traditional video game, and a lot of gamers online, particularly on 4chan, flipped their lids about it and started making accusations and threats wildly. The whole phenomena eventually became known as Gamergate, and eventually, Quinn had to move for her own safety. The drama spiraled and transformed into an attack on feminism in general, particularly with regard to the gaming journalism, since many people regarded female game journalists as intruders into a male space. Gamergate got real disgusting real quick, and ultimately, the creator of 4chan, Christopher Poole, stepped in and banned discussions of Gamergate on his website. This outraged many, many users, and there was a mass exodus to another anonymous image board called E10 that had even less restrictions on content. On 8chan, users were finally able to let their freak flags fly. And by let their freak flags fly, I mean they were able to be as racist and sexist as their tragic hearts desired. On March 15th, 2019, Australian man Brenton Tarrant entered the Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, where he proceeded to shoot and kill 42 people. He then got back into his car and drove to the nearby Linwood Mosque and continued his killing spree. All in all, he is responsible for the extinguishing of 51 innocent lives. If that wasn't bad enough, he posted his intentions and manifesto on 8chan, on which he frequented the far-right boards, and even live-streamed his carnage from a GoPro which he had strapped to his head. Now, I know that he wasn't an American and this wasn't an attack on American soil, but that's kind of the thing about these new websites, is it kind of erases borders. He was interacting with American neo-Nazis, and frankly, neo-Nazis all across the world are interacting together in the same space. That's dangerous, and that's part of why I'm so nervous about the exodus of mainstream conservatives from platforms like Facebook right now. By and large, the only people flocking to these alternative sites are people who are so thoroughly fed up with the coverage of the election and with censorship on social media. So they're inherently self-selecting into a group of people who are just as fed up as them. I know the algorithms on Facebook and Twitter are largely to blame for our society becoming comprised of various information bubbles, but leaving these platforms for ones without censorship in such a polarizing political moment really accomplishes the same result. I'm not saying that people are going to go on to MeWe or Parler and immediately become white supremacists, but they're definitely going to encounter a lot more radical content, and that might sway their viewpoints. Extremists are fueled by homogenous spaces wherein they can spread memes and ideas that ultimately lead people down the road to radicalization. A bit of edgy humor here, a link to a so-called champion of free speech there, and then boom, baby, you're reading the work of outright neo-Nazis like Andrew Anglin. The Southern Poverty Law Center published an article entitled McInnes, Molyneux, and 4chan, Investigating Pathways to the Alt-Right. And this article does a pretty good job of describing the way that these communities ease new recruits into their ideologies. Now, the Southern Poverty Law Center has come under criticism in recent years for labeling various groups as hate groups that are very different from the Ku Klux Klan or outright white supremacist groups. But regardless of what you think of all their judgments, whether or not they're fair, some groups are absolutely hate groups. In these cases, Southern Poverty Law Center has some really good information on them that should really be taken into consideration. That actually kind of illustrates one of the problems with all of this research. I've been doing this research for about 10 days, and trying to parse apart good sources from bad sources, it's like wading through molasses. Theoretically, this is the work that every citizen ought to do right now to be properly informed, and I've spent hours and hours, and I still don't really know exactly what's going on, or who I can trust. Another example of this difficulty is pulling information from the Anti-Defamation League. They're another Jewish American organization that was founded in 1913 with the goal of combating anti-Semitism, hate speech, and discrimination in general. Sounds great, right? Well, think again. Many thinkers today consider the ADL to be a highly conservative tool of the government that has been utilized over the years to squash movements for black civil rights, queer rights, and any criticism of the state of Israel. They even reportedly spied on Martin Luther King Jr. for the government and routinely label anyone delivering legitimate criticism of Israel's treatment of Palestine as an anti-Semite. I first ran into the ADL while researching Antifa, which of course stands for anti-fascism, and is comprised of a loose organization of self-described anti-fascists who engage in counter-protesting, doxing, and violent action against those that they perceive as fascists or white supremacists. ADL actually had a fairly balanced description of Antifa on their website, but I sought out descriptions from other news sources, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and even Fox News to write this script. Antifa has its roots in pre-World War II Weimar Germany, where groups of self-proclaimed anti-fascists would violently clash with fascist brown shirts. They also had a presence in Italy and in Spain, and have popped up in various locations around the world since their onset, wherever fascism can be found. Antifa really rose to prominence in America in 2017, when they clashed violently with white supremacists and neo-Nazis at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. This is, of course, the famous incident in which a woman named Heather Heyer was killed while several other people were injured when a white supremacist drove his car at high speeds into a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters. President Donald Trump condemned the entire affair, but said that there were very fine people on both sides, which many critics call justification and legitimization of the white supremacist organization which actually killed a person. Now, I'm a red-blooded American, so I've got to say, I'm pretty down with the idea of anti-fascism in general. We have fought several wars against fascism, and if you ask me, fascism is as antithetical to the purported values of this nation as it gets. Those torch-waving sons of bitches are sick people, and if they can't be helped, they should be locked up. Unfortunately, I can't stand behind all of Antifa's actions. One of the biggest issues with their behavior is that their hatred for white supremacists and fascists has occasionally bled over to mainstream conservatives and supporters of President Donald Trump in general. Whatever issues you have with the president and his supporters, painting people with such a broad brush can only serve to further divide the country. There are a great many Trump supporters who are in no way Nazis, but by being constantly referred to as such, are being driven further and further from a place where we can come together and unite as a nation. Plus, because Antifa is such a nebulous organization, and they're often present at Black Lives Matter rallies, there has been a tendency to label all supporters of Black Lives Matter movements extremists, which is patently untrue. Plus, because Antifa is such a nebulous organization and they're often present at Black Lives Matter rallies, there has been a tendency to label all supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement extremists, which is patently untrue. Patently untrue. Okay. So we're getting to the end here. I didn't really have enough time to dive deep into the Proud Boys or the Boogaloo Boys, but what you really need to know about them right now is that they're both far-right extremist groups with different agendas, and that they are both adherents to the ideology of accelerationism, which is a neo-Nazi invention that, among other things, seeks explicitly to plunge the United States into a massive civil war, with the belief that afterwards a new order will rise up along so-called natural hierarchies, most often meaning that white people will be on top. Maybe I'll do an episode on them sometime soon, provided I don't decide to abandon this society and live out the rest of my days in the woods with no internet. We'll see. Thanks for listening to Tumbleweed Radio, folks. This is a podcast from the World Journal. Bit of a walk away from our normal content. Maybe we'll get back to Legends next week. Maybe we'll continue to talk about the horrible parts of our society that really demand more light. I haven't decided yet. Either way, I hope you're listening. Thanks very much.